What if the words we use, defense or war, reveal more about the future of global power than any action? This week, President Trump floated the idea of reviving the United States Department of War. And thousands of miles away, President Xi Jinping hosted 26 heads of states and government leaders at a military parade in Beijing. Together, these two events show how the world order is shifting. Sitting with Chinese President Xi were his special guests, Russian President Putin, North Korean President Kim Jong and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. Also on that dais, this quartet that now many Western analysts call the axis of upheaval. All were watching the military parade, celebrating 80 years since the Chinese fought Japanese aggression to end World War II in Asia. The symbolism and the words show signs of a new world order that has started. This reinforces the message that came out of the SCO summit that had been held literally a couple of days earlier, when over 20 leaders stood alongside China and issued the Tianjin Declaration, calling for a multipolar, inclusive global order and rejecting any unilateral coercive measures, a clear rebuke of US tariffs and sanctions, and the way that the United States is throwing its weight around as if it's still in that hyperpower mode of the late 1990s, early 2000s. Do check out the vlog I just did on the SCO Summit and the messaging that came out of this. I will put a link in the description. Now, the viral picture of the three world leaders, Xi, Putin and Narendra Modi talking, chatting and laughing together is an iconic rebuke to Donald Trump's America First policies and the US attempt to divide and rule to retain its primary dominance. The military parade, unfortunately, also brings comparisons with the one that was just held to celebrate the United States Army's 250th anniversary parade in June 2025. In this case, it rubs salt into wounds given the lackluster ceremony held in Washington, D.C., which was widely described as being underwhelming. Many lawmakers stayed away on one pretext or the other, and President Trump sat hunched down watching the parade on the on-off rain that took place that day. Simultaneously, mass protests were taking place across the country under the No Kings banner in protest of his policies on immigration, among other things. Think about it. The US couldn't even get its own lawmakers to show up to the 250th Army Anniversary Parade. Meanwhile, China packed Tiananmen Square with allies from Asia, Africa and beyond. The contrast couldn't be sharper between a country going places and a country who had gone places. Donald Trump, who it seems was watching the military parade live, posted on Truth Social asking if Xi Jinping had mentioned the contribution and sacrifices of the United States in the war against the Japanese, although he did not name Japan as such. And he wrote, "The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it to secure its freedom from a very unfriendly invader." And he went on to write, adding that many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. His next paragraph was shocking by any standard. He wrote, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong as you conspire against the United States of America." While there was never going to be any question that Donald Trump was not going to like the image of Xi, Putin and Kim Jong together, a post like this is unprecedented in American history. Not because US presidents have never attacked rivals, of course they have. Reagan spoke about the evil empire, George Bush constantly about Saddam Hussein, but none have ever done this in a live, informal, sarcastic, almost meme-like way. It's like one of his grandchildren, a grade 6 boy, just got hold of his social media account. It signals a new era where American political communication itself is shifting, while the world is watching live. And it's a sign of this new order that is taking place that is threatening the American hegemony. The world is entering a new era of rearmament and confrontation. Global military spending has reached its highest point since the Cold War, and rival powers are flexing their strength in ways that we've not seen in decades. And that has made President Trump, who may not know history, but feels that the symbolism and messaging and names matter. They carry weight, history, and power. For more than 70 years, the United States has operated under the banner of the Department of Defense, an institution designed to sound protective, restrained, and defensive. But before 1949, the Pentagon had another name, the Department of War. Now President Donald Trump is pushing to bring back that old name. He argues that defense sounds weak, even politically correct, and that America should once again embrace a title that reflects its military strength.
That's defense. I don't want to be defense only. We want defense, but we want offense too, if that's okay. So you'll make a decision. But as Department of War, we won everything.
At first glance, this might sound like a branding exercise, but behind it lies a deeper fear. So the question is, does changing a name reflect a mere shift in rhetoric, or is it a signal of a much larger problem? Trump's renaming push comes at a time when military spending worldwide is exploding. In 2024, global defense budgets hit $2.7 trillion, a 9.4% jump in a single year. It's the steepest rise since the end of the Cold War. The top 5 military spenders, the United States, China, Russia, Germany, and India, account for over 60% of the global total. Over 100 countries around the world raised their military spending in 2024. In Europe, the war in Ukraine has triggered the sharpest military buildup in generations. Germany increased its budget by over 30%, Poland the same, and even Sweden, a newly admitted member of the NATO, crossed the alliance's 2% GDP threshold. In Russia, military spending surged to $149 billion, more than 7% of its GDP, or nearly 1/5 of the government budget. Moscow has embraced a full-scale war economy, and Ukraine, by contrast, is spending 34% of its GDP on the war, the highest military burden in the world. Virtually every tax dollar goes to defense. And then there's Asia. China has increased its defense budget for 30 straight years, reaching more than $314 billion last year. Japan posted its largest increase since the 1950s. India, Taiwan, and others are doing the same. The United States, however, by far remains dominant, spending nearly $1 trillion on defense, more than the next 10 countries combined together. Much of this is focused on nuclear modernization, cyber capabilities, and advanced technologies designed to maintain its edge over Russia and China. This isn't just an arms race, it's a global rearmament spiral, and it's not a good sign. The last time the world saw a massive similar surge in military spending historically was in the 1930s. Germany, Japan, Britain, France, and the US all boosted their spending in the late 1930s. By the time World War II began, global military expenditure had multiplied dramatically, which leads to the real question. If the last spiral ended in a world war, what does this one end in? Now, as these governments increasingly prioritize military security, it's often being done at the expense of economic and social trade-offs. This is dangerous in itself. If you reflect on the major drivers of the MAGA supporters in the United States, it is because they've been feeling they've not been doing as well as earlier generations and they're being left behind. They elected Donald Trump to spend less on the military, not more. Similarly, Germany's highly export-driven economy is being hit hard from US tariffs, and the economy has had the highest inflation and unemployment rates are at 10-year highs, and yet now it's spending billions on defense. This marks one of the most dramatic shifts in its defense policy since World War II. Ironically, China is holding its military parade, signaling its strength at a time when global powers are looking for a reason to blame it. For China, the parade is a performative act, asserting its position as a leading global power, capable of competing with, and in some areas surpassing, the United States militarily. It symbolizes the arrival of a multipolar world, where China is the central pillar. This is no longer Deng Xiaoping's Dao Guang Yang He, hide your strength, bide your time era. On September 3rd, 2025, today, China marked the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II with this massive Victory Day parade. This was the fourth such parade since Xi Jinping has come to power. But the context today is strikingly different. At home, China faces economic headwinds. There is slowing growth by Chinese standards, estimated to be around 5%, but still high by most other countries' standards. But there are other issues, including a property crisis that has been lingering on now for a couple of years, and there's rising youth unemployment. Abroad, ties with the West, particularly the United States, are fraying. And the post-war international order itself is being reshaped by the ongoing war in Ukraine and the Western response to China, as well as its fear of China's rise. That's why this year's parade was not just a ceremony, it is an important strategic communication. It showed tanks, fighters, drones, hypersonics, but it also showed something bigger: unity. It was a carefully chosen message directed simultaneously for China internally and for its rivals. The parade featured the latest military technologies, fourth-generation tanks and armored vehicles, carrier-based aircrafts and advanced fighter jets, drones, directed energy weapons, and jamming systems for cyber and electronic warfare, hypersonic missiles, missile defense interceptors, and strategic strike systems. But Beijing obviously will not be revealing its most secret projects. Instead, it's highlighted systems that are combat ready today. But such events are carefully choreographed to achieve a range of domestic as well as international goals. For domestic audiences, the symbolism is clear. A once weak China is now a great power, even in some areas potentially a superpower. The parade was designed as a massive spectacle, designed to foster national pride and unity. It serves as a powerful symbol of the country's progress from that century of humiliation to now being a global power under the leadership of the CPC. For foreign audiences, especially the United States, Japan, Taiwan, and China's maritime neighbors, the signal's even sharper. The display of cutting-edge weaponry is a clear sign to potential adversaries, primarily the United States, that China has the capability to project power and defend its core interests. And here think Taiwan, South China Sea, and the East China Sea. And it's effectively serving this as a deterrent. But the parade is more than hardware. It's also diplomatic theatre. After all, China only really started marking this date 10 years ago, and the functions used to be a fraction of the budget. This time around, it was to give a message that China is not alone and cannot be browbeaten. And there was record-breaking foreign attendance, particularly from Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, and Myanmar. The Philippines, which is a US ally, did not attend, and Singapore, who is generally much more strategically cautious, sent only their deputy prime minister. By assembling leaders from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, as well as Latin America, Beijing wants to present itself as a champion of the global South. The guest list itself is a diplomatic vote of confidence, but also is presenting itself and is seen as such as a responsible and stable power at a time when under Donald Trump, the United States looks not only volatile, but also extremely erratic. So much so that when recent surveys have been done across the world, they show that the world has a more positive view towards China, even in Europe, than the United States. President Xi was flanked by Vladimir Putin and North Korean President Kim Jong-un, and there present alongside him was one of the most striking images of the military parade. Instead of being isolated by the Ukrainian war, along with the SCO summit that was just held, Putin's gained legitimacy that he's not standing alone. While the US views Beijing as a strategic competitor that must be opposed, with plans to counterbalance Chinese ascendancy shaping Western strategies towards the whole global South. Forcing countries to choose has become a popular strategy, a binary option, with us or against us, like Bush gave. But it doesn't seem as if the global South will give up on China so easily, or make this binary choice that's wanted by Donald Trump. When the United States President Donald Trump warned on social media that any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will face additional tariffs, he got pushback from the Brazilians publicly, even if other countries kept their response silent and went on trading with China as usual. In addition, as Trump pursues his America First agenda and he attacks multilateral institutions and key allies and pursues his tariffs and trade war, the global South is finding China's narrative of a shared future and mutual respect more appealing. In March, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi stated, "China is naturally a member of the global South because we have fought colonialism and hegemonism together in history, and we are committed to the common goal of development and revitalization." The overarching message is layered. China was a decisive actor in the past, it is a formidable power in the present, and it seeks to be an architect of the future. For Xi, this parade consolidates domestic authority and signals to the world China is not only an inheritor of history, it is the designer of tomorrow's order. Coming back to the US, the Department of War was one of the first cabinet-level institutions created by the United States government in 1789. Its mission was clear: to oversee the nation's military forces, especially the army. In those very early days, America had a very small standing force, and the idea of a large centralized military was viewed with suspicion. Many feared that it would be turned inward and threaten liberty itself. Now, the Department of War was expanded during the Civil War, which oversaw massive mobilization, conscription, and logistics on a scale never seen before. They grew again during the Spanish-American War of 1898, as the United States began to project its power overseas in Cuba, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. By World War I, the Department of War had become a sprawling bureaucracy. It was managing millions of soldiers. It had vast training camps and an industrial supply chain that linked farms to factories to battlefields. Then came World War II. The War Department reached its zenith, overseeing the largest military mobilization in the United States history, from Normandy to Okinawa. At its height, it managed more than 11 million uniformed personnel and directed the construction of the Pentagon as well. That massive five-sided headquarters that we now see, which has come to symbolize American power at its peak. In 1947, after the devastation of the World War II, President Harry Truman and Congress passed the National Security Act. It created a new system. The Army, the Navy, and the newly independent Air Force would now be unified under a single structure, now called the National Military Establishment. But this name seemed to be bureaucratic and clumsy, just didn't stick. And in 1949, just 2 years later, it was replaced with a new title: the Department of Defense. The choice of words was deliberate. The Cold War was beginning. The atomic bomb had changed everything, and the United States wanted to project an image of restraint, of a nation committed to peace, but ready to defend freedom against threats from abroad. Still, not everyone approved. Critics feared that concentrating so much authority in a single Secretary of Defense risked creating what one newspaper called a civilian military dictator. And there were others that were lamenting over the Navy's independent status loss. But over time, the Department of Defense became the undisputed center of American military planning and power. Now let's fast forward to the present. President Trump has repeatedly floated the idea of reviving the Department of War. In meetings with foreign leaders, at NATO summits, and even in the Oval Office remarks, Trump has said that defense doesn't sound right, that America fights wars and should be honest about it. According to officials, the Pentagon has officially drafted proposals of how that change might happen. And some suggest it would take an act of Congress, and others believe it could be done under emergency powers, although we're not sure what emergency is happening right now. Critics argue that this is nothing more than a political theatre, a branding exercise meant to appeal to Trump's base. But supporters say it reflects a blunt reality. The United States military has been in near constant conflict since 1945, from Korea to Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan. So the question remains, is this about words, or is this more about setting the stage for a more openly aggressive posture in an increasingly unstable world? What does it all mean? In Washington, debates over renaming that Department of Defense may sound like semantics, but words carry meaning. They frame how a nation perceives itself and how it projects power abroad. But in Beijing, Moscow, Berlin, and beyond, armies are growing and alliances are shifting, and military budgets are climbing. But here's the irony. While America argues about words, China's shaping the reality. One side is renaming offices, and the other side is rewriting the order back to multipolarity and away from hegemony. And perhaps the most telling question is not whether the Americans should call themselves a military of defense or a military of war. The real question is whether we're entering an age where both terms will apply, defense for some and war for others. An age where symbolism, spending, and raw power collide. And if so, the new global order may be shaped not by compromise, but by confrontation. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing and sharing the videos if you are enjoying the content on this channel. This is GVS Deep Dive, and I'm Najma Minhas. Have a great day.